So I want to open it up for some questions and answers right now. Yes.
It's not directly what you were saying, but I've worked with some young people, and I have been very frustrated in the last few weeks because they're all white, and they are insulting each other using the word racist, among other things, and I don't exactly know what, I feel like it's an insult.
What word is it?
Racist.
They're using the word racist?
They're using the word racist against each other where it's not applicable.
Oh, okay.
It's like it's an insult.
Yeah, how old are they?
7th and 8th graders.
Okay.
And you were younger.
Have I encountered that?
Yeah.
Yeah, they use a lot of words that's just like, that is the wrong context. I don't know where you got that from. Yeah. I would say one way to deal with that is to get them to expound on it, get them to elaborate a little bit more on what it is they're saying. Because in that, you might find a jewel. They may have some good insight into what that actually is, right? Sometimes it may not be. It may just be they're throwing a word around and they don't know the basis of it, right? But it really requires you to be comfortable enough to meet them where they are. Because dealing with like younger people, you got to have some thick skin because their generation is a lot different than our generations. I'm Generation X. And I look at millennials and I look at Gen Z and I'm like, oh my God, like I feel like my parents sometimes. But I've had to strive to be comfortable being uncomfortable, right? In order to meet them where they are. And then because their attention span is a little bit shorter too than our attention span. I mean, all of us, well, yeah, all of us in this audience, we are social media immigrants. We're internet immigrants, right? So we know of a world beyond that. They're social media and internet natives, and that's all that they know. And the social media or the apps themselves deliberately reconfigures not only your attention span, but your cognitive development where it truncates your thought process. And what I mean by that is there are standard texts that is considered normal for certain type of apps that you're on. So if you're on Facebook or something like that, it's not built for you to make a status this long. There's a specific word count for each one because it's hardwiring the attention span. So we're dealing with a generation that has a different attention span. So one thing I kind of learned is you have to learn to double dutch. And when you get an opportunity to say something, you got to jump in and say it and jump right back out. Because they are not waiting around at all, you know? So in essence, you have to learn to be comfortable with being uncomfortable if you really want to reach them where they actually are, because they're not necessarily going to come to us. We have to find ways to come to them. Yes, sir.
Seems I have a lot of friends up in Canada. What?
You guys speaking to the people online.
Oh, okay. I have a lot of friends in Canada, and they don't seem to have anywhere near the problem that we do in the States with racism. And it would seem that a lot of that has to do with real estate. Is there anything really being done to eliminate the East Side or, being a ghetto? And, besides, the redlining and whatnot, is there any, I just don't see any solutions if you're all going to live in the East Side and we're going to live out in the second-tier suburbs, lily white.
Yeah.
It's never going to change.
Yeah, traditionally people tend to group in areas where they feel most comfortable. And historically, black people have felt most comfortable being around black people. You know what I mean?
The banking laws or the banking, the discrimination the banks, portray in schools. Going to Orchard Park High School as compared to, Bennett, there's quite a difference.
Yes.
And that reflects in college and the rest of your life. So
Yeah. Yeah.
what's the solution?
Yeah. So before I answer that, let me go back to what you mentioned about Canada. This whole idea of race is basically an American concept. You saw that was more on the background of other different societies in Europe. It was mostly class, but in America, race then class, right? So when you go over to Canada, people over there don't necessarily identify according to their race. They identify according to their nationality. So if I go over to Canada and I see somebody that looks like me, if they say that they're black, I know that came from America. If they say that they're Jamaican or they're Trinidadian or they're Ghanaian or they're Ethiopian, I know that they are defining themselves based upon a national orientation. But once they come across that border in America, you black. And if we don't know what category to put you in, you black, right? And because of that, you have people who have bought into that type of pseudoscience because there's no real basis of race, period. And unfortunately, like I mentioned earlier in the presentation, we have adopted that concept. So many of you have adopted this concept of whiteness, and that's what you bear, right? Today is a holiday for Irish Americans. It may be better to define yourself as an Irish American as opposed to a white person, especially in today's day and time, right? If you're from Italy and your ancestors come from there, Italian American. If you're from Germany, German American, because it disassociates you from that stigma of whiteness and a responsibility for those who created this myth of white supremacy, right? In terms of addressing that, there's no real silver bullet, because one of the things that I was mentioning is, as black people, we've confronted issues on all different sides: housing and real estate, health in terms of the medical industry and pharmaceutical industry, education, every aspect of this society or industry. So even if we strive to look at it and say, oh, we just may need better housing, right? That could be one part of the solution, but then you have another part of the issue that's going on over here in terms of health and access to that type of resource. Or now you got to look at schools. Yeah, the houses look nice, but how is the school actually doing here? And then now let's talk about businesses. So there's no real silver bullet. It has to be operating on many different fronts. And the one image that I showed you in terms of black resistance movements of change, these were all people operating in many different forms to address the type of conditions that we have been living in here in America. People addressing it from the cultural angle with music and art. People addressing it from the political angle of running for public office and striving to be a policy maker to direct those resources in the community. You have people doing it from a religious perspective, talking about ethics and morality. So it's coming from all different angles, right? And that's the exact type of approach that is needed, because we're talking about a community, and you have all of those elements in a community.